You do not trust a boy to break a kingdom. That was the rule, the belief, the iron certainty that guided every great European army before 1806. Young men, barely trained, barely tested, barely hardened by marching, hunger, and terror, were not the ones who cracked disciplined lines. They held the rear. They guarded baggage. They filled out the numbers. But they did not decide battles, especially not battles against Prussia. For decades, Europe had accepted one truth about Frederick the Great's heirs. No matter how outdated their politics or how ossified their doctrine, Prussian infantry did not break. They stood in neat, rigid ranks. They fired by volleys, crisp, mechanical, perfect. Their officers believed discipline alone won battles, discipline alone deterred collapse, discipline alone elevated them above the rabble of France's new conscript armies. And at the top of this military world towered the Prussian line infantry. Tall, seasoned, drilled to the edge of obsession, commanded by officers who could trace their lineage back to Frederick's wars. In 1806, they boasted units with decades of reputation. Musketeer regiments who had drilled on the same parade ground since 1740, grenadiers whose bearskins were symbols of fear across Central Europe. So when word spread that Napoleon's so-called Middle Guard, a formation created only recently, filled with conscripts barely past their teenage years, would face them, Prussian staff officers laughed. You do not defeat Prussia with boys. You do not overwhelm a line renowned for its steadiness with raw recruits marched from farms and villages of France. The very idea was absurd. Prussian generals, studying their maps the night before the battles of Jena and Auerstädt, made their assumptions clear. Napoleon's young guard and middle guard would not hold under pressure. They would not deliver a decisive blow. And they certainly would not decide the fate of Frederick's kingdom, because everyone knew the rule. Armies are broken by veterans, by men who have marched 1,000 miles, endured hunger, frost, and fear, not by youths with smooth cheeks and half-learned musket drills. And yet beneath that Prussian certainty, something new was taking shape within Napoleon's ranks. A formation forged not from aristocratic privilege but from ambition, talent, and revolutionary zeal. They were young, yes, some were barely 17. Many had never fired a shot in anger, but they carried something far more dangerous than experience. They carried belief. Belief in Napoleon, belief in France's destiny, belief that the Guard, no matter which echelon, never failed. And standing among them, polishing his musket beneath a gray Saxon dawn, was Sue's Lieutenant Jean-Baptiste Gérard, 19 years old, 5'6", sharp-featured, bright-eyed, and according to the letters he would later write, terrified of disappointing the veterans who marched beside him. He had joined the Guard only months earlier. His father, a veteran of the Revolutionary Wars, had warned him, "The Guard does not forgive failure." Gérard knew this better than anyone. His instructors, stern officers who had survived Italy, Egypt, and Marengo, drilled the lesson into him daily. You are the Guard. You do not retreat. You do not falter. You break the enemy or you die where you stand. But the world believed the opposite. Prussian officers scoffed that Napoleon was desperate, stuffing his Guard with boys. German newspapers called them the teenagers of the Corsican, mocking recruits who had not yet earned their mustaches. And even within the French army, line veterans muttered that the new Middle Guard was untested, unscarred, unproven. This was the rule, the belief, the narrative. But in October 1806, on the ridges near Jena, that rule would be shattered. Broken not by Napoleon himself, not by the old Guard, not by the hardened veterans of Lannes or Devout, but by the very youths Prussia dismissed. By Gérard and the Middle Guard Fusilier Grenadiers who would march straight into the teeth of a veteran Prussian line, and in a moment that stunned Europe, break it. Everything the Prussians believed, about discipline, about experience, about superiority, would collapse in minutes, because the truth was simple. No army in Europe understood what Napoleon had created. No one realized what these young guardsmen could do when unleashed. And no one imagined that a 19-year-old Sue's lieutenant would stand at the center of the moment Prussia's military myth cracked apart. But in 1806, one formation and one terrifying charge changed everything. Jean-Baptiste Gérard is 19 years old, and already the weight of an empire rests on his shoulders. Not because of his rank. Sue's lieutenant is insignificant in the towering hierarchy of Napoleon's Grande Armée, but because of what he represents. He is the new face of French power, the generation born not under kings but under revolution. The sons of farmers, cobblers, millers, and merchants who have been told since childhood that glory is attainable if they dare to reach for it. Gérard grew up hearing stories of the Italian campaigns, of Rivoli and Arcole, of a young General Bonaparte who outmaneuvered entire Austrian armies. His father served in those wars and came home scarred, limping, and filled with pride. The boy absorbed every tale, every victory, every transformation of France from a fractured monarchy to a continental force led by a man whose ambition knew no ceiling. When Gérard enlisted, he expected to join a line regiment. That was the normal path, years of drilling, marching, hunger, and battle before one even dreamed of serving in the Imperial Guard. But 1806 was not normal. Napoleon had expanded the Guard, creating the Middle Guard as a bridge between the Old Guard, the grizzled veterans of Italy and Egypt, and the Young Guard, the talented but inexperienced elite conscripts. Out of thousands of applicants, only a few hundred were selected. Gérard's test scores, his discipline, and a recommendation letter from his father's old commander propelled him into a world he never expected to enter at 19. The Middle Guard Fusilier Grenadiers. A regiment so new that its uniform still felt stiff, and its eagles shone with unblemished polish. Every man carried a reputation he had not yet earned. Every man felt the pressure of history watching, because to wear the Guard's insignia was to inherit impossible expectations. As the Grande Armée marched east in 1806, Gérard found himself surrounded by figures he had only heard about in stories. Marshals, Ney, Lannes, Soult. The iron discipline of Devout. The relentless energy of Murat and his cavalry. The Emperor himself, riding ahead, coat flapping behind him, eyes fixed on the horizon. The purpose of the campaign was clear: break Prussia before Prussia broke them. Prussia had hesitated for too long. Its generals believed they could match Napoleon as Frederick had matched his enemies. They trusted maneuver warfare taught in academies that still worshipped the 18th century. They dismissed Napoleon's reforms as theatrics. In the weeks leading to Jena and Auerstädt, Gérard saw the difference everywhere. French corps moved independently yet in harmony, each capable of defending itself, each capable of striking without waiting for orders. Prussian divisions still marched like clockwork blocks, rigid and predictable. French foragers kept the army supplied on the move. Prussian logistics collapsed under its own weight. French intelligence, driven by cavalry screens and daring scouts, painted a clear picture of enemy movements. Prussian commanders stumbled blindly into disaster, but none of that mattered to Gérard, because while generals think in maps, young officers think in moments. Moments when you prove yourself. Moments when you earn the right to stand beside veterans who have survived a dozen campaigns. For Gérard, that moment was approaching. On the night of October 13th, bivouacked near the Landgrafenberg Heights, he could feel it. The tension, the electricity, the whispers through the ranks. Tomorrow would be a great battle. The Middle Guard had never faced a major engagement. The Old Guard joked that the youths would finally lose their parade ground shine. Line officers scoffed that Napoleon was risking elite status on boys who still flinched at cannon fire. But Napoleon, he was calm, calculating, certain. He placed the Middle Guard near the center, close to where he himself would command from the ridge above Jena, not as reserves to be hidden but as a weapon to be used. That single decision meant everything. It meant Napoleon trusted them. It meant he believed these young conscripts could stand against the most disciplined infantry in Europe. It meant that when the time came, Gerard and his men would not be spectators, they would be the blade. As dawn crept across the Saxon hills, Gerard wrote a short note, found years later among his surviving papers. "We march today. The emperor smiles. The drums beat faster. I do not know what waits beyond the ridge, but I swear I will not disgrace the guard." The morning fog lifted. French skirmishers exchanged fire with Prussian pickets. Cannon rumbled from distant positions. By mid-morning the field widened, the enemy revealing itself. And on the hills opposite Gerard, the Prussian line stood arrayed in perfect ranks, hundreds of yards of blue and white, muskets gleaming, bayonets fixed, banners fluttering over regiments older than many nations. Veterans, hardened, confident, the very forces the world believed untouchable. This was the moment Gerard had feared and hoped for in equal measure. The middle guard formed into columns. Officers checked alignment. Drummers tightened straps. The air smelled of damp earth, powder, sweat, and the bitter tang of anticipation. Gerard felt his hands tremble. He steadied them on the hilt of his short saber. He thought again of the rule: boys do not break empires, but rules exist to be broken. And on this field, Napoleon intended to break Prussia's spine in a single day. The cannons roared. The drums thundered. Orders rippled down the line. And for the first time, the middle guard stepped forward into a major battle toward a Prussian army that had no idea what was coming. The order comes down the line like a crack of lightning. Fusilier grenadiers, in avant. Gerard's heart slams once against his ribs. His boots bite into the soft ground as he steps forward with the middle guard, the column tightening, dressing its lines with the practiced efficiency drilled into them for months. The Prussian guns are already firing. You can hear the rhythm of their artillery, heavy, deliberate, confident. Each shot lands with a thunderous crash ahead of the French advance, sending showers of soil and shards of rock into the air. Gerard does not flinch, though the air trembles with every impact. He marches. The middle guard marches. Ahead, the Prussians shift their formations. Gerard can see the white crossbelts of the musketeer regiments, the bearskins of the grenadiers, the stiff, unmoving posture of officers trained under an old system that believes steadiness alone wins battles. 200 yards. French voltigeurs dash along the flanks, firing irregular, skirmishing shots that pick off exposed Prussian officers. A few Prussian volleys reply, sharp, mechanical, textbook perfect. The sound is familiar to any soldier on any continent, the disciplined crash of muskets fired in sequence. But those volleys are too early, too distant. 150 yards, Napoleon's artillery shifts fire. The Guard's 12-pounders roar, launching iron over the heads of Gerard's men. The rounds slam into the Prussian line, blowing holes through ranks that pride themselves on never bending. Smoke thickens. The sulfur stings Gerard's nostrils. His breath quickens. 120 yards. A Prussian officer shouts an order. The line steadies. Muskets come to the shoulder. "Steady," Gerard whispers, though no one can hear him in the thunder. 100 yards, the Prussians fire. Light erupts from their line, hundreds of muzzles bursting flame simultaneously. The volley slams into the middle guard with a ripping sound, followed by screams. Men fall. One tumbles into Gerard's shoulder. He barely registers the weight before stepping over the body and continuing forward. 80 yards. "Close the gaps," officers shout. Gerard's voice joins them. He forces calm into his tone even as adrenaline floods his veins. 70 yards, the Prussians reload with crisp mechanical precision. Their second volley flashes, tearing into the French again. Another man drops beside Gerard, Henry Valois, 18 years old. Gerard wants to look down to confirm the wound, to help, but he cannot. The middle guard moves like a single living thing, and stopping is death. 50 yards. Now the French drums hammer a faster rhythm, boom, 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 urging them to close the distance before a third volley. The Prussians aim again. 40 yards, Gerard can see faces now. The set jaws, the narrowed eyes, the pride, the certainty. Middle guard, a captain bellows. Prepare to fire 30 yards. Make ready, muskets tilt upward. Present 20 yards. The Prussian third volley explodes, devastating at this range. Men are torn backward. Gerard feels heat sear past his cheek as a musket ball rips the air beside him. 10 yards. Fire! The middle guard unleashes a point-blank blast of musketry so violent it seems to punch the air itself. The smoke is blinding. The smell of burnt powder envelops them. And then, charge! Steel flashes, bayonets level. Gerard's legs surge forward before he consciously moves them. He is running, screaming, thrusting through smoke so thick he cannot see his own hands. Prussian line appears in fragments, faces, uniforms, flashes of fear. Some still try to reload, others fumble with bayonets. Others simply stare at the unstoppable wave bearing down on them. The impact is brutal. Gerard slams into a Prussian musketeer, driving his bayonet into the man's midsection. The shock vibrates through his entire body. For a moment he cannot breathe. Then training takes over: pull, step, thrust again. All along the ridge, the middle guard crashes into the Prussian veterans. And something the world believed impossible begins to happen. The Prussians, Frederick's pride, Europe's disciplined ideal, bend, not all at once. Not in a dramatic, cinematic collapse, but in small signs. A foot sliding backward, a hesitation, a faltering reply to an officer's command, a widening gap in the line. Gerard sees it. Everyone sees it. The middle guard pushes harder. Dozens of Prussians fall. Others break away from the melee. A lieutenant tries to form a rally line but cannot be heard above the screaming and the cannon fire. The unthinkable is happening. Prussia's line is giving way to the boys. Gerard feels the battle turn palpably, physically, as if the weight of an empire lifts off the shield of one army and drops onto another. His voice cracks as he shouts for his men to advance, to maintain pressure, to keep pushing. They drive the Prussians backward in a series of short, violent bursts. 10 yards, then another 10. Then another. Beyond the melee, French artillery shifts again, now firing over their heads at retreating Prussian formations. The crash of cannon echoes across the hills. To their right, Marshal Lannes' corps presses forward. To their left, Soult's divisions surge. The French line is becoming an unstoppable tide. Then a revelation. As the smoke thins for a moment, Gerard sees a Prussian battalion standard, white eagle on a black field, tilting backward, not in organization, not in tactical withdrawal, in panic. Gerard's breath catches. This is the moment the middle guard has created. They have broken the line. The impossible action, the one Prussia swore could never occur, has happened at the hands of the very youths they mocked. French officers sense it too. Drummers beat the advance. Flags tilt forward. A roar rises from hundreds of throats. Guard, guard, en avant. If you find this kind of forgotten history as fascinating as we do, we'd be honored if you'd hit that subscribe button. We believe these stories of courage deserve to be told. And by subscribing, you help us ensure they aren't forgotten. But the battle isn't over. To the east, more Prussian formations appear, fresh troops marching to reinforce the collapsing line. Gerard sees them, sees their numbers, sees the danger. They are forming for a counterattack, a massive one. The middle guard, bloodied, exhausted, outnumbered, must face them alone until the rest of the French line catches up. This is the moment when failure seems certain. And Gerard knows it. Yet he steps forward anyway. Permission for Part 4. The ground trembles under thousands of boots. The new Prussian force emerges from the drifting smoke. 2 full battalions, nearly 1,200 men, advancing in perfect lines, drums beating, officers shouting. Their uniforms are immaculate. Their muskets gleam. These are not shattered remnants. These are fresh reserves, committed to crush the French wedge before it can widen. Gerard feels his throat tight. The middle guard has already taken heavy casualties. Their ranks are thinner, their formation uneven. Powder fouls their barrels. Their arms ache from firing, thrusting, reloading. And yet the Prussians advance. Steady, steady, steady. Form, Gerard shouts, running along what remains of his company. Dress the line, ready arms, officers echo him. Drummers beat the rassemblement. The middle guard, these 19 and 20-year-old conscripts, snap into formation with a discipline that should not be possible under fire, because they are guard now, and guardsmen do not break. The Prussians halt at 150 yards. Their muskets rise. Gerard sees the officers' swords drop. "Volley!" the Prussian line commander shouts. The volleys tear through the French front. Gerard hears the horrible sound of bodies hitting earth, feels heat streak past his arm. Smoke rolls across the field like a curtain. 90 seconds until they close, a sergeant says beside him, voice shaking. Gerard doesn't need the calculation, he sees it. The Prussians will reload, fire, advance, fire again, then charge with bayonets, classic Frederikian doctrine. If they reach 30 yards, the middle guard will be drowned under weight alone. "Steady," Gerard calls. The middle guard raises their muskets. "Make ready," Gerard's voice is drowned by another Prussian volley. The blast hammers the guard line. A fusilier beside him, barely 17, spins backward and collapses. Gerard feels the emotional pendulum swing. Fear, anger, resolve, all in a heartbeat. Present, the middle guard levels their muskets. Fire! The fusillade strikes the Prussians at just over 100 yards, farther than ideal, but the effect is immediate. Several enemy files crumple. Officers stagger. The line hesitates, but it does not stop. The Prussians advance again. 100 yards, 80. Their drums pound a brutal rhythm that seems to sync with Gerard's heartbeat. 60 yards. "Fix bayonets," Gerard shouts. Steel scrapes, locks click. The middle guard tightens. Some men mutter prayers, others groan under exhaustion, all stand fast. 40 yards, this is it. Gerard lifts his saber. The Prussians prepare to fire a devastating close-range volley. 30 yards, their muskets rise. 25 yards. "DOWN," Gerard bellows. The middle guard drops to one knee as one body. The Prussian volley rips overhead, killing only the wind. Gerard slashes his saber forward. Fire! The middle guard unleashes a blistering counter volley directly into the Prussian front rank. At this range, 20 yards, the effect is catastrophic. Bodies fall in layers. For the first time, Gerard hears uncertainty ripple through the Prussian formation. And yet, they do not stop. They lower bayonets. They charge. A wall of blue and white surges forward. Gerard feels time compress into a single, agonizing instant. Charge! Both sides collide in a storm of steel. Gerard's world becomes fragments, faces twisted in rage, bayonets clashing, boots slipping on blood-darkened earth. A Prussian grenadier lunges. Gerard parries with his saber, drives his shoulder into the man, then thrusts his bayonet with his left hand. A maneuver drilled endlessly but never used until now. All around him, the middle guard is fighting for its life. A Prussian battalion officer swings his sword at a French fusilier. Gerard intercepts, blade meeting blade. The officer snarls, shoves him back. Gerard's boots skid. For a heartbeat, the world narrows to the cold steel at his throat. Then a French sergeant barrels into the officer, knocking him aside. Gerard gasps for air. The battle rages on. The lines twist, shatter, reform. The Prussians press with superior numbers. Gerard hears French officers shouting, "Hold, hold, hold." But holding seems impossible. A group of Prussian grenadiers breaks through a gap, 20 men pushing hard. Gerard turns his company toward them. "On me," he leads from the front, driving straight into the breach. The clash is brutal, bayonet thrusts, musket butts swinging, fists and boots when weapons fail. And then something changes. The Prussian assault loses momentum. Gerard sees it in their eyes, in the flickering uncertainty of men who expected a simple breakthrough and instead found immovable resistance. The middle guard is not falling back. They are pushing forward. Gerard feels the shift as clearly as a gust of wind. Energy surges through the French ranks. "À la garde," the men shout. "À la garde," the chant rolls like thunder. The Prussians falter. Another few yards, another push, another collapse of their front rank, then the breaking point. A Prussian company standard, its silk torn, its bearer wounded, tilts, retreats, slips backward into the ranks. Gerard sees the moment the line fractures. "Forward," he roars. "Drive them," the middle guard surges. The Prussians begin to withdraw, first in disorder, then rapidly, then in full retreat. And now finally French reinforcements crest the ridge behind Gerard. Lannes corps, the tricolor waves, drums thunder. The French right swings like a hammer, smashing into the retreating enemy. The Prussian battalions crumble. What was a resisting force becomes a fleeing mass. The impossible has happened twice in one day. First, the middle guard broke a veteran Prussian line. Second, they held against a counterattack that should have annihilated them. As the enemy dissolves downhill, Gerard stands in the midst of smoke and ruin, chest heaving, uniform torn, saber stained. He cannot speak. He cannot fully comprehend what his regiment has done. No one can. But across the field, Prussian officers stare in disbelief. Because the youths they mocked, the teenage guard, have done what no army has done to Prussia since Frederick's rise. They have broken them. For a few moments, the battlefield is eerily quiet, only the hiss of settling powder smoke, the groans of the wounded, and the faint thunder of distant cavalry pursuits. Gerard steadies himself, planting his saber tip into the earth to keep from collapsing outright. The middle guard has survived. But what they do not yet understand, what no man in the ranks can yet know, is how profoundly their actions have just altered the fate of Prussia, of Europe, and of Napoleon's empire. Because the shock that ripples outward from that broken Prussian line is not tactical, it is existential. On the Prussian side, disbelief turns quickly to dread. Word spreads among staff officers like a contagion. The line broke to the middle guard, to the conscripts. At first, they assume misinformation. Panic exaggerating reality. But messengers arrive breathless from the field, confirming the same impossible report. Experienced regiments, men drilled under the shadow of Frederick's legacy, did not hold. Instead, they were shattered by soldiers who, in some cases, had yet to see their 20th birthday. What they didn't know was that this collapse was not an isolated failure. It was the first crack in a wall about to crumble entirely. Across the broader battlefield, other French corps, Lannes, Soult, Ney, press their advantage. The Prussian structure, rigid and slow to adapt, cannot react with the fluidity Napoleon demands from his marshals. Messages are delayed. Reserves are misallocated. Commanders argue over outdated doctrine while their formations disintegrate. And still the shockwaves spread. At the Prussian High Command, General von Merlendorf receives fragmentary reports. Center broken, reserves failing, guard troops overwhelming their best infantry. He refuses to believe the last one. "Impossible," he mutters. "The French Guard are veterans, not children." But the truth and the humiliation cannot be denied. When the middle guard flag is sighted advancing where the Prussians expected retreat, it triggers a psychological collapse more devastating than any musket volley. This was not the old guard with its legendary aura. This was the middle guard, new, untested, mocked. If these youths could break Prussia, who in Europe could stand against Napoleon's vision? By late afternoon on October 14th, the situation becomes unmistakable. French divisions envelop Prussian flanks. Murat's cavalry, unleashed with terrifying efficiency, slashes into retreating columns, capturing thousands. Prussian officers attempt to rally their forces, but the troops, stunned by the collapse of their center, fall back in disordered waves. The battle becomes a rout. The rout becomes a collapse, and the collapse becomes a national catastrophe. At Auerstädt on the same day, Marshal Davout's single corps defeats the main Prussian army. A disaster made possible by Prussian command's disorientation and disbelief following the breaking of the line at Jena. While historians often highlight Davout's triumph, they sometimes overlook the spark that ignited broader collapse. The middle guard's victory shattered the assumption of Prussian superiority at the exact moment Napoleon's strategy required such a blow. What the Prussians didn't know was this: Napoleon placed the middle guard in the center because he wanted the psychological victory as much as the tactical one. He knew that if Europe witnessed youths defeating the most rigid force on the continent, confidence in Prussia and in all resistance to France would evaporate. This was the turning point of 1806, not simply a battlefield victory, a narrative one. The ripple effect continues almost immediately. Prussian command structure disintegrates. King Frederick William III flees eastward. Entire regiments surrender without firing a shot once rumors, false or true, spread that the Guard is near. Cities open their gates, fortresses capitulate, and through it all, Napoleon remains characteristically cold and analytical. On the afternoon after the battle, he writes dispatches noting the unusual performance of the middle guard. "These young soldiers," he remarks, "have proven worthy of the name. They have conquered their fear in Prussia." The phrase circulates quickly among French staff. They have conquered their fear in Prussia. And with each repetition, the legend grows. Meanwhile, Gerard and his fellow fusiliers, filthy, exhausted, wounded, do not feel like conquerors. They sit on overturned carts, tend the injured, share water with comrades who will not live through the night. Gerard writes a letter in shaky handwriting. "We broke them. I do not know how. We are but boys, yet today we fought as lions. I think the Emperor saw us. I think, perhaps, we did something worthy." He has no notion of the geopolitical shockwave now radiating through Europe. He does not know that within days, whole provinces will fall. He does not know that the Prussian army, once the envy of Europe, will dissolve, its remnants fleeing to the banks of the Vistula. He does not know that the Battle of Jena Auerstädt will be remembered not only for Napoleon's brilliance, but for the moment young guardsmen overturned a century of military assumptions. What he does know is the silence that follows battle, the strange ringing in his ears where cannon once thundered, the hollow heft of a musket after hours of use, the way the air smells, burnt powder, trampled grass, the copper tang of blood, and he knows something else. They, the middle guard, have earned their place. No more mockery, no more doubt, no more whispers comparing them to parade ground soldiers. They are guardsmen now, guardsmen who broke Prussia, and the world will never see them the same way again. Night settles over the ruined fields of Jena. Fires crackle in scattered pits. Surgeons work by lantern light. Somewhere, cavalry horses whinny in the dark, restless after the long pursuit. Gerard sits with his back against a broken wheel, his uniform stiff with dried sweat and powder, a bandage wrapped around his left forearm. He does not remember when he was wounded. He remembers only the shock of metal, the heat, the instinctive recoil, and then continuing forward because stopping meant death. The middle guard rests around him. What remains of it? These are no longer fresh-faced conscripts. Their expressions are older tonight, harder. Many have lost friends. Some have lost brothers, but their eyes hold something new as well. Pride, earned pride, because today they carried the impossible. They broke a myth older than they were. They shattered the certainty of a nation that believed itself unbreakable. Individual names surface from the smoke and chaos. Men whose stories will never make it into official reports but who matter nonetheless. Corporal Felix Martin, age 20, who held the left flank when his sergeant fell. Private Léon Arnaud, 19, who dragged 2 wounded comrades to safety under musket fire. Sergeant Guillaume Morel, 21, who shouted forward for the guard, even as a bullet grazed his scalp. These are the men history forgets unless someone speaks for them. Gerard thinks of all of them as he stares into the fire. He thinks of Valois, who fell beside him. Of Rousseau, who had joked that morning he would die before letting a Prussian take the middle guard standard. Rousseau kept his promise. And Gerard thinks of the moment the Prussian line broke, the disbelief on their faces as the boys they mocked drove bayonets through the gaps, refusing to yield an inch. To this day, historians debate how such a collapse occurred so quickly. Some blame Prussian rigidity, others credit Napoleon's positioning. But for Gerard, the explanation is simpler: belief. The guard believed they could not fail, and so they did not. Word reaches the bivouac that Napoleon has asked specifically for casualty reports from the Middle Guard. He wants to know how they performed. He wants to know how many fell. He wants to know the names of officers who distinguished themselves. A murmur spreads. The emperor saw them, watched them, counted on them, and they did not disappoint. For Gerard, this is the moment that feels unreal. He imagines Napoleon calm, poised, surrounded by marshals, gazing down from the ridge as the Middle Guard plunged into the Prussian line. Perhaps he recognized the regiment's banner. Perhaps he saw a 19-year-old lieutenant bracing his men during the counterattack. Perhaps he understood that this was the birth of something new, not just a force, a legend. Within weeks, the consequences solidify. Prussia collapses entirely. Luft, Magdeburg, Prenzlau, fortress after fortress surrenders. The Prussian army, once a model of European discipline, is reduced to ragged remnants retreating beyond the Oder. Napoleon marches into Berlin. Officers walk in disbelief through the halls where Frederick's portraits hang crooked on smoke-stained walls. And nowhere is the humiliation felt more deeply than among the officer corps. Because the story spreads quickly. The Middle Guard broke them. Young conscripts shattered the veterans. Napoleon's teenage guard proved themselves a weapon more flexible, more fearless, and more devastating than the Old World's armies could comprehend. Gerard receives a commendation, not a medal, those are reserved for higher ranks, but a citation for valor in the regimental records. His name will be read aloud at muster. The emperor may never meet him, but his actions are now inked into the lineage of the Guard. In November, as the army marches deeper into Prussian territory, Gerard writes a final letter from the campaign. I do not know if I am a hero. I know only that on the day we faced them, I felt fear, and still I went forward. If that is courage, then let these words stand for all of us who marched into the fire. He survives the winter. He fights again in 1807. Many of his comrades do not. The Middle Guard will bleed in battles far deadlier than Jena. Some will rise to the Old Guard. Some will die unknown. Some will vanish into the endless lists of casualties that define Napoleon's wars. But the moment they created on October 14, 1806, the moment the Prussian line broke, will echo for generations. It will reshape European warfare. It will destroy the myth of Prussian invincibility. It will force the reforms that later build a new military power under Scharnhorst. It will demonstrate to the world that Napoleon's strength lies not just in his veterans, but in the young men who believe in his vision so fiercely that they charge into the impossible. That is their legacy. And yours, as the witness to this forgotten corner of history, is to remember them. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. Every click tells the algorithm this piece of history is worth remembering. We're dedicated to rescuing these forgotten stories from the archives. If you want to join us on this mission, please subscribe and turn on notifications. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment with your city or state and tell us if someone in your family served. Thank you for ensuring that Sous Lieutenant Jean-Baptiste Gerard and the 800 men of the Middle Guard Fusilier Grenadiers do not disappear into silence. They deserve to be remembered. In the months that follow the victory at Jena Auerstädt, the Grand Armée becomes a force of almost mythic stature. But within that myth, individual lives, young, fragile human, carry the weight of memory. And none feels that weight more than Sous Lieutenant Jean-Baptiste Gerard, whose world has forever changed. He marches through towns that only weeks earlier believed Prussia unbeatable. Now their streets whisper a different truth. Napoleon's guard cannot be stopped, not even the youngest among them. Gerard hears local merchants speak of the Middle Guard in hushed astonishment, as though they are describing something supernatural. He knows better. They are not invincible. They are not immortal. They are 19-year-olds with shaking hands, tired legs, and haunted dreams. They are sons who miss home, friends who fear death, young men who learned in a single hour how quickly the world can turn to fire. But they are also something else now. They are the soldiers who overturned a kingdom's pride. Throughout the winter, Gerard's regiment receives replacements, new faces arriving to fill the gaps left by those who never rose from the fields near Jena. Gerard looks at the fresh recruits the way veterans once looked at him. Curiosity, concern, and the unspoken question, will they stand when the time comes? He knows what the answer must be. For the Guard, it is always yes. One evening, while the regiment is quartered near Poznan, he walks alone along a freezing riverbank. Snow drifts across the frozen surface in soft spirals. His breath clouds the air, and he really thinks for the first time since the battle, what will become of all this? Of Napoleon's empire, of Prussia's fall, of the sacrifices already made. He cannot see the future, but he senses what historians will later confirm. Jena Auerstädt marks a pivot in European history. Prussia's defeat will lead to sweeping reforms, the rise of a new general staff, and a reborn military that one day will challenge France again. But in 1806, all of that lies far ahead. For now, Gerard knows only that the Middle Guard has earned its place, no longer dismissed, no longer underestimated, no longer mocked as teenagers in uniform. They have become the beating heart of the empire's myth. Letters from home arrive sporadically. His father writes, "You have lived what I once feared, a battle where victory comes not from the old hands, but from the young who refuse to yield." Gerard folds the letter carefully, storing it inside his coat. As winter deepens, the regiment prepares for more campaigning. Rumors swirl of Russian armies moving west, of new coalitions forming, of the emperor's unending hunger for decisive victory. Gerard feels the tension of it, the weight of a future filled with battles he cannot yet imagine. He and his men clean their muskets by the fire. They trade stories of Jena, each man remembering different pieces. The smell of powder, the crush of bodies. The moment the Prussian lines shuddered and began to crumble. They speak of Valois, Rousseau, Martin, Arnaud, men whose courage will never be inscribed in marble but deserves to be carved into memory. One night, a young recruit asks him, "Lieutenant, were you afraid?" Gerard pauses. He thinks of the ridge, of the smoke, of the Prussian volleys flashing in the morning haze, of the charge that felt like leaping into thunder, of the instant he believed the counterattack would crush them all. "Yes," he finally says, "but courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is doing what must be done while fear tries to pull you back." The recruit nods. In that moment, Gerard understands the cycle of the Guard. The young become seasoned, the seasoned become legends, and the legends become lessons for those who follow. When spring comes and the roads thaw, the Middle Guard marches east again. New battles await Eylau, Friedland, and others that will test them in ways Jena could not foretell. Some will fall, some will rise, some will be forgotten. But the legacy of what they did on October 14, 1806 endures. They shattered the myth of Prussian invincibility. They proved that discipline can be met by belief. They showed Europe that a new kind of army, born of revolution, led by ambition, fueled by youth, could redefine the battlefield. Years later, survivors of the Middle Guard will tell stories in taverns, in barracks, on quiet porches as the sun sets. They will talk about the day they stopped being boys, the day they became guardsmen, the day they changed history. Gerard will tell those stories too. He survives the campaigns of 1806-1807. He earns promotion. He continues to serve until the great catastrophes of 1812 and 1813, where the Middle Guard suffers losses so heavy that entire companies disappear into the snows of Russia or the fires of Leipzig. Gerard himself is wounded twice more, but lives long enough to return home after Napoleon's fall. He dies in 1849 at the age of 62, a modest schoolteacher in the quiet town where he was born. Few know that he once stood at the center of a moment that overturned an empire's pride. His service records gather dust. His name fades from public memory, but not from ours. Because remembering Gerard means remembering the hundreds who stood beside him, the young faces who charged into the impossible, the men who carried bayonets against the most feared infantry in Europe and refused to break. And why does this story matter now? Because history often remembers only the giants, Napoleon, Frederick, the marshals, the kings. But the fate of nations is decided by those who stand in the smoke, in the mud, in the terror of the front line. Those who act when the world says they should fail, just as Gerard did, just as the Middle Guard did. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. Every click tells the algorithm this piece of history is worth remembering. We're dedicated to rescuing these forgotten stories from the archives. If you want to join us on this mission, please subscribe and turn on notifications. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment with your city or state and tell us if someone in your family served. Thank you for ensuring that Sue's Lieutenant Jean-Baptiste Gerard and the 800 men of the Middle Guard Fusilier Grenadiers do not disappear into silence. They deserve to be remembered.